Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a strange major to have American literature and marine biology. I don't know what I was supposed to do with that coming out of school. I don't know how it got me here. Maybe it's just that I like to read Moby Dick, which is the combination of the two. But today we're going to talk about building the patient database. And again, my name is Peter Nalen, president of Compass. And with me, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Come on up. We got Dave Stefanoni, who is head of early stage commercialization at Upsher-Smith. We have Ramsey Johnson, who is the senior director, clinical and regulatory operations at Eddimer. And third but not least is our own John Siemienski, who is director of interactive services at Compass Healthcare. So we're going to talk about databases today and how to build one, how to get folks in them. But before we start, I just would like to ask you for some information. Could I please have your first name and your last name and your home address and your phone number and your email address? And would you please confirm your email address for me? And actually, I'd like your birthday, too. You don't want to give that to me? Would you give me all this? Now? No. Why not? Aren't you ready to have a relationship with me? Don't you know enough about me right now to give me all that information? Don't you know what I could share with you later if you gave me that information? You don't. So it really is, you have no idea what value I can provide for you. So why would you give me any information? What am I going to give you for that? What's my currency? You don't know what it is. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about defining what is a database, how to design one for your brand or your company, and how to ensure it's successful. So let's start off. What is a database? Well, what is a database? We all know what a database is, right? It's the cylinder. It's that thing we see on every PowerPoint slide when we talk about database. It's the drum, isn't it? Well, it isn't. And this is the mistake we all kind of make. We think of a database as a thing instead of a process. It's a relationship marketing process at the end of the day. A database is a means to an end. It's not the end itself. It's really a way to get there. It's a way to achieve several marketing or business objectives. So how do we look at it, and what's the best way to look at it? If it's a relationship marketing process, where do we start? Well, we start with identifying key strategic marketing or business objectives. What does the brand want to achieve? Do they want people in their clinical trial? Do they want to educate people about the disease or about an upcoming potential treatment? Do they want to find out insights about the audience so they can develop better programs? So these are the things you need to understand before you start anything. And then the first step you make is you gather some intelligence. So you find out about your audience that you want to target and that you want to participate in your database program. What are their interests? What do they find valuable? What would they be willing to give their name, address, email address? What would they want? How would they want it delivered to them? Where are they? And so what do you need to do to develop the relationship? Once you have that, then you can build your drum. And this one's a lot cooler than the orange one because it's got segments in it. But within that, you can begin to acquire folks into the database. You can begin to engage them with information, segment them in the database, provide them information that they're looking for, and then you can begin to have the relationship marketing. Or if you have an advocacy relations group within your organization, you can start developing relationship management. I know at Compass what we have is a patient relationship management group that will, on behalf of our clients, reach out and build relationships and manage the relationships directly with the patients. So you can do the combination of your database program and your direct in-person type of programs. And then you measure this and you optimize it and you rinse, lather, repeat. So when do we use database? What are the applications that we can use over the course of the brand life cycle? Well, in pre-launch, there's lots of reasons to do it. You can do it for clinical trial recruitment, which we have direct experience here on the panel today. You can also employ a database program to do what we like to call prescription development. So just like market development, you have a drug that is hopefully going to be approved within 12 to 18 months. You want to start developing that audience, preparing them for the introduction of the drug. So you can do that pre-launch by providing, again, appropriate information, building a relationship, so when the launch happens, you can move into a trial phase. You can also have patient or customer relationship management across the life cycle of the drug, from pre-launch to launch to post-launch. At launch, you can drive trial with your database. Post-launch, you can work on persistence and adherence to make sure folks are taking the drug appropriately and achieving the best outcomes possible. So how do we start? Well, as Stephen Covey used to say, begin with the end in mind. As my carpenter buddies used to say when I was in college, measure twice, cut once. And this is really where a lot of the hard work takes place. Because the first thing you have to do, as we kind of talked about before, is determine the goals of the programs. What are the objectives of the programs? Because this will drive almost every part of the program, from what target audiences you reach, what drivers, what ways you go reach them, how you drive them to the database, and almost as importantly, how they opt into the database. And why does that make sense? And why is that so important? Because how they opt into the database will dictate how you can use these names down the road. So if you have a disease education site, and when they opt into the database, they're opting in for education, information about the disease from the program. In the future, the only thing you can communicate to them and deliver to them is information about the disease and about the program. If you launch a drug 18 months down the road, the drug can't send them an email. The drug can't communicate to them because that's not what they signed up for. So you have to decide up front how you're going to use this database. And as many of you may or may not know, a database is quite a valuable asset to any organization. So you want to make sure you word the opt-in broadly enough so down the road you can use it for whatever purposes you need to use it. The next, and as importantly for all of us that are managing these programs, is to set expectations and manage them appropriately, especially with small patient populations. We hear a lot of the time you'll have a patient population of 500 or 1,000, and all of a sudden, let's go get 250 of the 500 patients worldwide in our database in 3 months. Now, that's just not realistic. I mean, if you look at any of the metrics across the board of historic opt-in, percentages of people that visit a site, that move through a site, over time, at best you can do 10 to 18% can even get to the page to opt in at any one time, much less in 3 months. So, there's a lot of benchmark data you can use there. You can ask your partners who have worked in this space for empirical data, because we'll know pretty much what works, what doesn't work, how quickly it'll work, but also what to test, because no two brands are the same. But over time, you set the right metrics and the right milestones. You know which ones to dial up to get people in, which ones are not working. You dial those down. So that's really key as you start out, to know who your audience is and how many of them you can get in a certain period of time. And then, again, with all the key stakeholders, setting key milestones and the metrics at each one of those milestones, and collaborating both internally with maybe your legal folks or with your clinical affairs folks, with your external partners, the PR agency, your patient marketing agency. Make sure they're all kind of consistently working together towards the same goals going forward. So with that, I'd like to ask the first question to our panels. Here, you've all kind of initiated database programs at your organizations. What were the reactions when you came up with the proposal? What were the highlights and the lowlights, if they were?
Yeah, I think it's going back to the point you were making about sort of thinking about the end up front. I think in a lot of ways it was easier for us in the beginning to think about all the potential ways we could potentially use the database. But in doing that, we came up with a framework for a database that was, 15 pages long with 100 questions. So I think a lot of time, the more difficult question is, what do you want to do with the database initially? But to have a long-term plan in place, or at least be thinking about a plan for changes that you can make to the database sort of long-term. So I think that was the initial challenge we had is, what do we want to use it for right now? And for us, that's, clinical trial enrollment.
Gotcha. Dave, what did you find in your organization?
Well, I mean, some of our conversations around this have been fairly preliminary, and I would argue maybe we're a little behind the eight ball on some of this, but similarly to what you were discussing, we would have benefited from this much earlier if we'd had this set up to do clinical trial work and find patients that could get into it. We missed that that opportunity for one particular product, and I think we still have it for another. The issue for us when we talk about these things becomes who should own it? Who should, what can be done with it? Is it a purely medical, clinical tool or, for their utility, or does it have benefit in the commercial setting? And quite frankly, that's what I'm still kind of trying to navigate as to how we can serve all those masters with one tool and not, quadruple our spend. And I think you talked a lot about what they're opting in for to make sure that we either address that on the front end or find ways to repeatedly address it as the needs of the program change through its life cycle.
Gotcha.
Well,
John,
I think multiple groups can own it. I mean, and can share the data, but I think it's important to define early on, who's going to own it initially, and then I think ultimately it can be shared by everyone.
Fair point.
You've seen a lot of these kicked off over your career. What are some of the reactions or things you wish some of your clients knew when?
Some of the, is this on?
No. You guys can share.
Yeah, some of the things are making sure, as Peter mentioned earlier, what are people actually opting in for? That's one of the biggest concerns that you want to have up front. And then defining what they're opting in for clearly. And if you don't do it right the first time and you need to do it again later on, you want to roll out another program, communicate that back out to them. Give your audience a chance to re-enroll in this new program. Not all of them will. Hopefully a lot of them will. If you provide the value that those people are looking for, you're going to pull that out of your database. That's the key. And the second part of that would be if people do get those communications and are not interested, don't allow them to just opt out of all of your communications. Provide a list of things that maybe they want to opt out of. Maybe they don't want to opt out of everything. They want to opt out just out of these normal communications they're getting on a regular basis, but they want the long-term communications to make sure they're keeping up with what's going on with that particular brand.
Okay. I know a question we've talked about is, okay, what's a patient registry? Is that a database, or what's the difference, and who owns what?
Yeah, I think I'll answer that. Basically with patient registries, you're really looking at studying and understanding patient outcomes and doing clinical research, whereas with a patient marketing database, you're really trying to understand, gain insights about your patient population. What do they find valuable? What are the messages that are going to be effective and provide that value back to them to get them to engage in your programs? It's really about building relationships at that point.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this even before we got up here, that sometimes patient registry and a patient database can overlap a little.
Yeah, and they will.
Yeah, and you can ask some of the questions in your patient database that you may ultimately want to ask in your registry, but just not in as much detail. And ultimately you can use your patient database to go out to all your members and say, we have a registry now that's open, and we'd like you to sort of re-engage with us and answer some more questions at this point. But it doesn't have to be that in the beginning.
Correct, and you can also do it the other way around. Maybe you don't have a patient database yet and you have a registry. For HIPAA reasons, you can't necessarily just market to those people in that database. So build communications out to those people and ask them if they want to be a part of those. They'll give you your information again.
Great. So I have a question for the audience. Besides databases of competitors and other brands that you're following, how many have opted into databases, maybe in the consumer world. So it's interesting. I think, believe it or not, how many people have bought something on Amazon? Okay. Everyone that just raised their hand, you opted into a database. And you don't think about it, because in the consumer world, it's done quite well. You actually opted in at the moment of acquisition, right? I never thought I'd ever opted into any database until October 24th. And I remember this day quite clearly because it's exactly 7 days before October 31st, which is my mom's birthday. And on October 24th, I got an email from 1-800-Flowers that said, hey, it's your mom's birthday in 7 days. I'm like, yes. So apparently I had opted into that database, and not only did I give them my birthday, but I gave them my mom's birthday. And thank goodness, because I'm still the #1 son. But that was them creating a relationship, providing value, and I was in a database that I was very happy to be in. So what are some other examples of who does it well? I mentioned Amazon. So I like to cook, and so I thought I'd try some new type of cooking. So I went on to Google, and I typed in cookbooks, and sure enough, Amazon popped up. I clicked on the ad and came to a custom landing page, which showed a bunch of cookbooks and a call out for fun foodie favorites. And I'm a foodie, and I like to have fun, so what are my favorites? So I clicked on it, and sure enough, it showed me the perfect book, because I like cooking, but just like a database is a means to an end, to me, cooking is kind of a means to the end. The end is drinking wine. I love drinking wine, almost as much or more than cooking. So this was a perfect book for me called The Drunken Botanist. So it not only helped me cook, but it helped me drink. And Amazon, knowing that I still would like to cook, sent me an email down the road showing me other cookbooks that I could buy to pair with my wine. So if you think about that example right there, it's a great example of what happens in direct marketing, right? It is find your audience, but in a purchase cycle, we find the retailer, and then you need to engage that audience or acquire them, which is bringing them to the site, and then convert them. Well, in the rare and orphan space, we kind of changed that up a little bit, because the reach and the find is one of the most difficult, but the most important. And the next important part is engaging them. And engaging them means providing information, providing research, providing some sort of currency other than the book that we can buy in the consumer world that would have them opt into your database and then retain them over time. So I'm going to use an example that Ramsey is near and dear to from Edinburgh, which the condition is XLHED, which is a genetic condition that affects the growth of teeth and hair, and also the ability to sweat. So this example, if you were fairly new to the condition and you were just seeking information, you might type in something like info, something very general, XLHED info into Google. You see a lot of choices. Let's say you click on the top one because it's promising a broad array of information. It's also prompting you to do an insight that we found is in small communities, both good news and bad news travels very quickly, but everybody wants to help everybody out. So if I can have somebody donate $25 for me to the condition, boy, would I do that. So the landing page that you come to, again, is broad. It provides broad information about the condition, other advocacy groups around the world, events, and this call out to help donate money to other advocacy groups, but also provide more information. So we're being transparent. Before I ask for your name and address, we're sharing with you what we're doing. We're providing currency of a donation and information, and then we're asking you to opt in. And here's a little learning in the opt-in. We're showing you what opt-in means and how long it's going to take. It's going to take 8 steps, okay? It's going to take a little while, but you know where you are along the way. I mean, how many people have started filling out either a questionnaire or a survey or opting in, and you get to page 3, and you're like, you know what, I don't have time for this. I'm out of here, right? And what's nice about this one is, let's say at step 3, your son calls you, and you got to go downstairs, you got to shut down your computer. When you come back, it'll pick you up right at step 3. So these are the type of insights and learnings that you put into to make sure your database is successful. And then they got a general email saying, hey, thanks for opting in for general information. Now, we have another example. because there are multiple ways of finding potential participants in your program. And there's many ways that people gather and consume information. So let's say I'm a woman who has XLHED somewhere in the family, and I'm thinking of starting a family myself. And I'm active in advocacy groups, and I'm actually on the foundation website, and I'm looking at maybe research or treatments. It gets me to a page where I find out that actually Edinburgh has a program going on, where not only that there might be a test that I can, a trial I can go into, they might do free genetic screening. I'm going to find some more information. But on this page, it's down a little bit lower, is a link to the site I shared with you before, the XLHED network site. But on that page, because again, it's customized to the searcher, is a call out, are you thinking of having a baby? Why yes, I am. And so I clicked on that, and it takes me to a custom site that is geared to people at this stage in their lives who may think they have XLHED or may be a carrier. And this provides very different information, right? It provides information about how it's inherited, how it's passed on, what to think about when you're having a child, who to talk to, how to talk to them. And so now I've been provided information. This is valuable to me. I've gotten some currency from you. Now I'm willing to join the network because I might get more information like this and find out more and help me on my journey to starting a family with the potential of passing on XLHED. And again, you opt in and you get a different customized email coming back that talks about the genotyping and what's available. So 2 different examples getting to a same end, but getting a different type of target audience to join up. So we've seen a couple examples. We've seen them in consumer world. We've seen them very specifically in the rare and orphan space. Now I'll turn it over to the panel. We've talked about programs, talked about some obstacles starting them up. What if people were going to start some database programs here, what would be your advice?
So, one of the things that, and this may not apply to everybody, but one of the areas that we're looking at going into, one of the challenges we have is even defining the patient to know where to look for them and how to qualify them to be in a database. They're described differently by different physicians. They're treated differently in some cases. So I think depending on what your needs for the database are, A, being able to define the patient that you need, or B, if you need it defined broader to make sure that you cast your net wide enough to include all those patient types. The one thing that we didn't touch on, and I know you kind of went through some scenarios about where to find people. Advocacy is always a good place to start for certain disease states. In some cases, you'll find that advocacy doesn't already exist, depending on what you're looking at. Then the only recommendation I can give is get out and press the flesh. I mean, in things that I've worked on in the past, we actually had to go and find individual physicians who had, these populations of patients that were, both the physicians were kind of off the grid, if you will, from the standard way that pharma goes and identifies thought leaders and prominent KOLs. So you may have to get out and do a lot of networking for some of these physicians to find some of these specific patient populations. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think just in the most general sense, the one thing I would say is it's never too early to start. I mean, we started building our patient database when we were still, doing our preclinical development, and it became invaluable when we started getting into the clinic in terms of helping to enroll, our first phase 1 adult study. And then the next thing I would say is sort of listen to your patient population. I mean, I think we saw a huge uptick in our numbers when we started doing things like making the $25 donation and offering the Have the Convo information, and that was because we listened at patient advocacy group meetings and we listened to some of the folks that we talked to, and one of the things we found out is that the patient advocacy groups are important to them, donating to those groups is important to them, and also just that there was a huge learning gap with genetics among these people. I mean, they have a genetic disorder, but they really didn't know a lot about sort of inheritance patterns and things like that. They didn't even know what questions to ask a genetic counselor when they went to see them. So I think offering those things, helped immensely with driving our numbers up.
Yeah. You know, it's, you raise an interesting point about advocacy groups and supporting them. And a lot of people think, oh, well, the only way to support them is to write them a check. And that's not what it is. Again, the currency a lot of times is information. It's access to information. It's transparency. And you can provide as much support and that's appreciated as much as dollars as in terms in access to information, feet on the street, support of their programs. And it's that kind of building out and building those relationships will pave the way for all the programs that you're going to do. You know, we're big proponents of, you know, the personal touch of, and that's again what our patient relationship managers do, but they reach out directly with patients, directly with advocacy groups, directly with the community, because that's the best way to find out what are people not getting, what kind of information do they want to receive, and how to best to deliver it. And the other thing, I know a lot of people are always thinking is like, well, you know, we don't have a lot of information to give right now. We're still a year out. We're still 2 years out. You know, there's regulations about what we can say. And that's absolutely true. But what we've learned, too, is any communication is better than zero communication. You know, what happens is, you know, nature abhors a vacuum. And when there's a vacuum of information, it will get filled, and it's generally filled with not flattering types of comments or information. So we advise folks, even if you have nothing to say, I know you haven't heard from us in 3 months. It's not that we've forgotten you, but we have nothing to say. Or we will have something to say 6 months from now. Or, you know, we can't tell you right now, but this is what we can tell you. It's keeping that, you know, that relationship warm, if you will, over time that's really important.
The only, all good points. The only thing I would add to that, and we're kind of tackling a little of this in reverse, where we actually have what is amounting to a physician or caregiver database that we'd like to kind of flip the switch on and make a patient-facing portion of it later. And, you know, for those in the room, it's currently in a space around treating seizure disorders. I think we can all agree between Epilepsy Foundation, AES, other societies, you could argue there's a dearth of information out there about seizures. But what we tried to do was work with a panel of physicians to come up with information to fill those gaps, things that weren't out there, things that hadn't been readily updated, things that they knew there were questions about. So you can still, even in a busy space like that, find subtle pieces of information that people are looking for that can continue to provide value. So, you know, there's always that opportunity to put together that panel too.
Yeah.
See, the other thing to remember is it's you know, the earlier is better, but it's never too late to start talking and having a discussion and building relationships with your patient audience, providing the value that they're looking for often, regularly, as Peter said. Make sure that you're communicating with them. A relationship is not a one-way conversation, it's a two-way conversation. You can't continually just ask for information from the patient. You also have to give them something back regularly. So that's the key. It's a relationship.
Yep. And it's you know, what's I think a lot of companies find hard to believe is they actually, patients and caregivers do want to have a relationship with you, because in a lot of cases you're the only hope, right? You're the only solution out there. So they are looking to engage, because a lot of clients say, well, they don't really want to talk to us and we'll just push information out. They do want a two-way dialogue. And by doing so, you're going to find out who are the key patients, who are the influencers that influence other patients. Because that's important too, because they're going to be talking about your company, your brand. You just would like them to be saying good things or the right things, because they're going to be talking anyway. And you want to try to identify who are the key influencers and how can you support them as best you can. All right. I think I just have one more thing. Yeah, in summary, some best practices to keep in mind, and we've talked about them. So you saw in the example between Amazon and the two Edinburgh examples, you know, there's a bunch of different ways to find, reach, and engage the audience and bring them to wherever you want them to enroll in your database. And it doesn't always have to be online. You know, there are populations that inherently aren't online and would rather be called or mailed to or visited. Again, that's part of the information gathering is how do you have access, what do they want to hear, what's the best way to deliver the information. And the second point, as important, understand who your target audience is. You know, I can't emphasize enough the importance and the value of understanding the true, authentic patient experience. How does the disease affect the patient and their family? How does the potential treatment affect the patient and the family? What are they doing about it? How engaged is it? How engaged is the community? Is there a strong community? Are there advocacy groups? Are there no advocacy groups? Is there no information? Is that an opportunity to create, you know, an opportunity to create a destination or an advocacy group or a disease education program? Because each community, just like every disease, is different and unique. You know, what are their feelings towards industry? Are they hostile? Have they been taken advantage of in the past, or are they hopeful? And they want to engage with you. So each one has a characteristic that is unique that can be leveraged going forward. The other point is, like we saw in the beginning, demonstrate value. I mean, I think in the beginning this presentation, no one here would be probably willing to give me their email address. And hopefully we've demonstrated some value here. And you know, someone might want to talk to me later, but certainly more now than you were in the beginning. So make sure you understand what the currency is, what do people find valuable, and deliver it to them. Collaborate with the key stakeholders. We mentioned that earlier, internally and externally, so everybody's kind of going in the same direction. And make sure you understand what those goals are. And the beauty of a lot of these programs, you can measure constantly what's working, what's not working, and you know, through the dashboard, dial up the good ones, dial out the bad ones, and optimize going forward. So that's all I have there. Open it up to the room for any questions to the panel.
Have you noticed a difference in the age range of your target patient? It seems to me like young people don't have that same barrier that maybe some of us older people have to sharing information, and do you have any insight into that?
Well, I mean, a little bit of the insight is the age is not as much of the driver as the need for information. So the younger generation, they're actually, you know, they know more. So they're in more databases than they imagine because they're sharing their information all the time through, you know, of course, you know, the Facebook types of activities that they have, and through, you know, Instagram and Pinterest and all those. So they're doing more sharing than they realize, and they don't even realize how much they're getting back for it. They don't even realize they've engaged in a relationship. So, but again, it's really specific to not only the age of the audience, the socioeconomic status, and the type of condition, how serious, how chronic it is, and how readily available information is. You guys have anything to add?
I think that's the point I was getting at, where you may have to kind of get out and press the flesh with certain physicians or groups to find. That's exactly what I was kind of referencing. The population at the time that I was dealing with was end-stage critical limb ischemia, and these people were not out on the computers very often and not looking to volunteer into these things. And so you were trying to, I found even sometimes the caregivers for them, the family members, were beyond kind of that window to access that, you know, the more traditional ways that we are now. So I think that gap still exists, and I wish I had an answer for you, but you know, I think it's going to kind of vary depending on the disease state and what the burden on these patients are. So.
I mean, one of the things, we've noticed it a little bit, but you know, one of the interesting things we've seen is with our disorder, because it is so rare and because there is no treatment, the only place people can get information is the internet. And so the folks that we target tend to be pretty internet savvy, and so they're pretty willing to give us that information. The one area we have noticed some difficulty is just geographically. You know, when we try and target folks in Europe, for example, Germany specifically, for some reason, they're very reluctant to provide any information on the internet. And so I think that's where, to your point, it's become important for us to sort of get out there and go to conferences in Germany and meet with the patients and really show them the value of being in the database.
flip side, just to add a little levity, if you're targeting my child, just throw Minecraft out there, he'll answer any question you want.